The day my son, Michael, got married, I received two pieces of news. The first was that I had a new daughter-in-law. The second was that I had become the widow of the richest dead man nobody had ever heard of. I smiled through the wedding, accepted congratulations, and said nothing about the $59 million, because I saw something in his bride's eyes. It wasn't love. It was hunger. And I knew she would be coming for me. The wedding was held in a botanical garden on the outskirts of Denver, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The string quartet played Vivaldi, the champagne flutes chimed like tiny bells, and Michael, my Michael, looked happier than I had ever seen him. His eyes, the same gentle gray as his father's, were fixed on Chloe as if she were the only person in the world. And Chloe, she was a masterpiece. Tall, with honey blonde hair swept into an elegant knot and a smile that could disarm a battalion. She wore a simple, brutally expensive silk gown that clung to her like a second skin. To everyone else, she was the blushing bride, the picture of adoration. But I've lived 72 years. I've learned to watch hands and eyes, not lips. I watched her hands when she hugged me. Her grip was firm, possessive, not the tentative embrace of a new family member, but the confident grasp of someone staking a claim. Her nails were immaculate, a pale, predatory pink. And I watched her eyes. When she looked at Michael, they shone. But when she thought no one was looking, her gaze would sweep over the guests, the venue, even me, with a cool, swift calculation. It was the look of an appraiser. I sat on a wrought iron bench, a glass of untouched champagne sweating in my hand, and let the polite chatter wash over me. The memory of the phone call from 3 days ago was a block of ice in my chest. It had been a man's voice, dry and rustling like old papers. A Mr. Abernathy. Mrs. Vance? Eleanor Vance, he had asked. Yes. My name is Arthur Abernathy. I was the legal counsel for Richard Vance. The name hit me like a physical blow. Richard. My husband. The man who had walked out of our lives 40 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a clipped, cruel note that said, "I'm done." The man I had told my son died in a car accident in another state, a lie I'd constructed to protect a 5-year-old boy's heart. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news," Mr. Abernathy had continued. "Richard passed away last month. He left his entire estate to you." I remember the silence in my small, quiet kitchen. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. "I think you have the wrong person," I'd said, my voice thin. "My husband is dead." "He is now," the lawyer had replied, with a faint, weary sigh. "Eleanor, the estate is valued at, approximately $59 million. $59 million. The number was absurd, a fiction. I lived on my late husband's, my real late husband's, the one I had married 10 years after Richard left, pension and Social Security. I tended my roses. I read library books. I lived in a world of coupons and careful budgets. $59 million was a number from another planet. Now, at the wedding, I watched Chloe laugh, a perfect, musical sound. She was talking to one of Michael's partners from his architecture firm. She touched the man's arm lightly, her head tilted, making him feel like the most important person there. She was a performer, and she was always on stage. Michael brought her over to my bench. "Mom, isn't she incredible?" he beamed, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. "You are a vision, Chloe," I said, and my voice was steady. It was a voice I had perfected over decades, calm, gentle, the voice of a harmless old woman. "Oh, Eleanor, please," she cooed, squeezing my hand. Her skin was cool. "I'm just so happy to finally be a part of this family. To be able to take care of you and Michael." Take care of you. The words hung in the air, sweet and venomous. Later, as they were cutting the cake, a towering confection of white frosting and sugar flowers, I saw Chloe's gaze drift past Michael's smiling face to my small house, visible on the hill beyond the gardens. It was a modest, 2-bedroom home, but it was mine. The mortgage had been paid off for 20 years. The garden was my life's work. In her eyes, for just a fraction of a second, I saw not a home, but a property. An asset. A loose end to be tied up. That's when I knew. The money, Richard's impossible, ghostly money, had to remain a ghost. It wasn't a gift, it was a test. And this beautiful, smiling woman, who now held my son's heart in her manicured hands, was the final exam. I smiled, raised my glass when the toast was made, and clapped with all the other happy guests. But inside, the quiet, orderly world of Eleanor Vance was gone. The garden gate was locked. The storm shutters were down. A war was coming to my doorstep, and I would be ready for it. I had 59 million reasons to be. The newlyweds were gone for a week, a whirlwind honeymoon in Cabo that Michael documented with a series of sun-drenched photos sent to my phone. Chloe in a white bikini, laughing against an impossibly turquoise sea. Michael, grinning, holding up 2 tropical drinks. I'd reply to each one with a simple heart emoji, my thumb hovering over the screen, feeling a cold distance that had nothing to do with geography. I spent that week in my own world. I pruned my prize-winning roses, their thorns catching on my worn gardening gloves. I baked a lemon-thyme loaf cake, filling my small house with the clean, comforting scent. I sat in my father's old armchair, the leather worn smooth as river stone, and read a biography of Harriet Tubman. My life was a tapestry of these small, quiet rituals, and they were my armor. On the 8th day, a Tuesday, a sleek, silver sedan I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. It purred where Michael's sensible station wagon would have rattled. The doorbell rang, a sharp, 2-note chime that felt like an alarm. I opened the door to find Chloe, radiant in a cream-colored cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored slacks. She looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine. Standing slightly behind her was a young man in a suit that was a size too tight in the shoulders. He had a nervous smile and a leather briefcase clutched in his hand like a life raft. Eleanor. Chloe chirped, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation and enveloping me in a cloud of her perfume, something expensive and floral, but with a sharp, metallic note underneath. I hope we're not disturbing you. Michael is stuck in a meeting, but we were just so worried, and I couldn't wait another minute to see you. Worried? I asked, closing the door softly. My eyes flickered to the young man, who was now standing awkwardly in my small foyer, dwarfing the antique coat rack. Oh, this is Julian, Chloe said with a wave of her hand. He's a wonderful young man who helps families with their, well, with their future planning. To make things easier. I see, I said. I led them into the living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I gestured for them to sit on the sofa, the one with the floral print I'd had for 30 years. They sat on the very edge, as if afraid the cushions might swallow them. Would you like some tea? I offered. It's what I always offered. That would be lovely, Chloe said, her smile never faltering. As I went to the kitchen, her voice followed me, pitched to carry. It's just, this big old house, Eleanor. It's so much for one person. The upkeep, the bills, the garden. Michael and I, we just want you to be able to relax. To enjoy your golden years without any of the stress. I returned with a tray holding my grandmother's porcelain teapot and 3 cups. I poured the tea, my hands perfectly steady. The clink of the china was the only sound. Chloe took a delicate sip. Julian, she said, her voice shifting, becoming more businesslike. Perhaps you could show Eleanor what we were thinking. The young man, Julian, snapped his briefcase open with a loud click. He pulled out a sheaf of papers, thick and imposing, and laid them on my polished coffee table. They sat there, stark white against the dark wood, like a surrender notice. As Chloe was saying, Mrs. Vance, he began, his voice reedy, this is just a way to streamline things. To take the burden off your shoulders. Chloe reached over and patted my hand. Her touch was dry and cool. The first document is just a simple power of attorney, darling. It would allow me to handle your finances, pay your bills, that sort of thing. So you never have to worry about a thing. My gaze fell on the dense paragraphs of black text. I didn't need to read the fine print. Richard had taught me enough about contracts to know that a simple power of attorney was as simple as a loaded gun. And the second part, Chloe continued, her voice softening into a tone of deep, practiced sympathy, is a preliminary agreement. We've found the most wonderful place. Willow Creek Meadows. It's more like a resort than a retirement community. They have a pool, activities, gourmet meals, and we could sell this house. The market is incredible right now. You'd have a lovely nest egg, and we'd know you were safe and sound. There it was. The entire plan, laid out on my coffee table between the teapot and a bowl of potpourri. My life, neatly packaged for liquidation. They saw a frail old woman. They saw peeling paint on the window frames and a garden that required too much work. They saw an asset to be managed, and finally, to be sold. I looked at Chloe's earnest, smiling face. The performance was flawless. The loving concern, the gentle persuasion. But I saw the glint in her eyes, the barely concealed impatience. The hunger. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Richard, years ago, in a rare moment of quiet reflection, looking out a window. Everyone thinks the predator announces itself with a roar, Ellie, he'd said. They don't. They come to your door with a smile and a casserole dish. I took a slow sip of my tea. It was chamomile, and its warmth spread through my chest, calming the tremor I refused to let show. I placed the cup back on its saucer with a soft click. Then, I looked directly at Chloe, meeting her bright, predatory gaze with the placid, slightly unfocused look of a woman whose mind was perhaps beginning to wander. I smiled, a small, gentle smile. I gestured toward the papers with a slight wave of my hand, as if they were a minor inconvenience, a pile of junk mail. Thank you for the concern, dear, I said, my voice soft and airy. It's so thoughtful of you. But I'm managing just fine for now. I picked up the teapot. More tea? The silence that followed was absolute. Julian the notary looked from me to Chloe, his Adam's apple bobbing. Chloe's smile didn't vanish, but it froze. It became a mask, and behind it, for one breathtaking second, I saw a flash of pure, cold fury. It was like watching a crack appear in a porcelain doll, revealing the hollow darkness inside. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. The smile warmed again, the eyes softened. Of course, Eleanor, she said, her voice a little too bright. Whatever you think is best. They didn't stay long after that. The small talk was strained, the pleasantries brittle. I walked them to the door, watched them get back into the silent, silver car. As it pulled away, Chloe looked back at my house, and this time, there was no smile at all. I closed the door and leaned against it, the solid wood cool against my back. The house was quiet again, filled only with the scent of lemon cake and old books. But the air had changed. It was charged, heavy. The first shot had been fired, not with a bang, but with the rustle of legal papers and the cloying scent of expensive perfume. The siege had begun. In the days that followed, Chloe's strategy shifted from a frontal assault to a campaign of insidious whispers. She began to weave a web, sticky and nearly invisible, designed to isolate me and convince Michael that his mother was unraveling. It was a masterful, cruel performance, and I was her unwilling audience of one. It started with small things. My car keys, which I had kept on a hook by the door for 20 years, vanished. I searched the house, my frustration mounting, only for Chloe to find them an hour later in the butter dish in the refrigerator. She gave me a look of such profound, pitying concern. Oh, Eleanor, we all have moments like this, she'd sighed, stroking my arm while Michael looked on, his brow furrowed with worry. Then there were the appointments I supposedly forgot. Mom, Chloe said she called you 3 times to confirm your doctor's appointment for Tuesday, Michael would say, his voice strained with a mixture of love and exasperation. She even left a note on your counter. I never received the calls. There was never a note. But when I insisted, Chloe would produce her phone, showing a call log with 3 calls to my number, her face a mask of wounded innocence. "I don't know what happened, Michael," she'd whisper, loud enough for me to hear. "Maybe she's just not checking her messages." Technology, I learned, could be a formidable liar. The most insidious part was how she used my routines against me. She knew I paid my bills by check on the 1st of every month, a ritual as ingrained as watering my hydrangeas. One afternoon, while I was in the garden, she came over on the pretense of dropping off some groceries. A few weeks later, I received a disconnection notice from the electric company. It was a shock, a deep, personal violation. I had never, in 50 years of managing a household, missed a payment. When Michael came over, summoned by a frantic call from Chloe, he found me sitting in the dim, powerless house, the notice clutched in my hand. Chloe was already there, fluttering around, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. "See, Michael? This is what I was afraid of," she said, her voice trembling. "She's forgetting the most basic things. It's not safe for her to be alone." "I didn't forget," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I sent the check. I always do." "Of course you think you did, darling," Chloe purred, kneeling beside my chair. "But the mind plays tricks on us sometimes." Michael looked at me, his face a portrait of conflict. He wanted to believe me, his mother, the bedrock of his entire life. But Chloe was so convincing, so logical, her evidence so tangible. He saw a frail woman in a dark house holding an overdue bill. He saw the woman he loved, a pillar of strength and competence, ready to solve the problem. His loyalty was being torn in two. I knew that fighting her directly, accusation for accusation, would only make me look more unhinged. I was the old woman, confused and defensive. She was the vibrant, concerned caregiver. In a battle of optics, I would lose. So I held my tongue, endured the humiliation of Michael calling the power company and paying the bill over the phone, and listened to Chloe's saccharine suggestions about getting me a little help around the house. When they finally left, the power humming back to life with an artificial cheerfulness, I sat in the silent house and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was turning my son against me, not with overt hostility, but with the slow, sweet poison of concern. She was building a cage for me, bar by bar, and using Michael's love as the hammer. I couldn't do this alone. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 40 years. I drove downtown. The city had changed. Glass and steel towers had sprouted like metallic weeds, dwarfing the old brick buildings I remembered. I found the address Mr. Abernathy had given me. It was one of the new towers, a monument to money and power, with a lobby so vast and silent it felt like a cathedral. Arthur Abernathy's office was on the top floor. The view was staggering, the whole of Denver spread out below, the distant Rockies a jagged, purple line against the horizon. The man himself was older than I'd pictured, perhaps 70, with a fringe of white hair and the same dry, papery quality to his skin as his voice. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that looked older than my son. He stood up as I entered. "Mrs. Vance. Eleanor. Please, come in." His office was lined with books, not just law tomes, but history, philosophy, poetry. It was the office of a man who understood more than just contracts. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Abernathy," I said, sinking into a soft leather chair that sighed under my weight. "Please, call me Arthur," he said, sitting opposite me. He folded his hands on his large mahogany desk. "I confess, I've been expecting you. Richard told me. He told me you were the most formidable person he ever knew. He said if anyone could navigate a storm, it was you." The words were a balm on a raw wound. "Richard said that?" "Many times. Which is why he left very specific instructions." He leaned forward. He knew his money would not be a simple gift. He called it a loaded inheritance. He knew it would draw people like your son's new wife. He described them as elegant sharks. He wanted me to provide you with any and all resources you might require to protect yourself. And to protect Michael. For the first time since this began, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't a crazy old woman fighting shadows. I had an ally. A powerful one. I told him everything. The visit with the notary. The disappearing keys. The cancelled electricity payment. I laid out the whole ugly campaign of psychological warfare. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, his pale blue eyes fixed on my face. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but laced with steel. Gaslighting, he said. A classic, brutal tactic. She is attempting to have you declared incompetent to seize control of your assets. The assets she doesn't even know you have. She's playing for the house and your pension, ignorant of the fact that she's a petty thief trying to rob a fortress. He steepled his fingers. Richard did not abandon you, Eleanor. I need you to understand that. In the late 70s, his business partners became entangled with some very dangerous people. The kind of people who don't send lawyers, they send men with crowbars. He was threatened. Michael was threatened. The only way he could protect you was to vanish, to cut all ties, to become a ghost. He created a new identity and built a second fortune, all the while watching over you and Michael from a distance. The checks that arrived from that anonymous family trust for Michael's college tuition? That was Richard. The insurance policy that paid out when your second husband passed? Richard arranged that, too. He never stopped being your husband or Michael's father. Tears pricked my eyes. 40 years of bitterness, of feeling abandoned, began to wash away, replaced by a complex, aching grief. The cruel note, the silence, it had all been a lie. A terrible, necessary shield. He also left a warning, Arthur continued, his voice dropping. He said, money attracts predators, Arthur. Tell Ellie to trust her instincts. They never failed her before. So, Eleanor. What do your instincts tell you to do now? I looked out the window at the sprawling city. I thought of my small house, my garden, the life I had built on the ashes of Richard's departure. I thought of Michael, my sweet, trusting son, caught in the middle of a war he didn't even know was being fought. My instincts didn't scream. They didn't roar. They spoke in a calm, cold voice inside my head. You don't win a siege by waiting for the enemy to starve. You win by setting a trap. She thinks I'm a senile old woman, I said, turning back to Arthur. She thinks I'm weak and confused. I think we should let her keep thinking that. Right up until the moment the cage door snaps shut. A slow, thin smile spread across Arthur Abernathy's face. Excellent, he said. Richard would have been proud. Let's get to work. Chloe decided it was time to escalate. Her psychological prodding wasn't working fast enough. My quiet resilience was an affront to her timeline. She needed a dramatic, undeniable event, a public spectacle of my incompetence that would force Michael's hand. She decided to set a trap, unaware that I was already baiting my own. Her chosen stage was my garden. She knew how much it meant to me. It wasn't just a hobby, it was my sanctuary, my life's work translated into soil and petals. Each rose bush, each lavender hedge, was a living memory. She began by complimenting it effusively. Eleanor, your garden is just breathtaking, she'd say whenever she visited. You have such a gift. It must be so much work to keep it this perfect. The compliments were the sugar coating on the poison pill. The plan was simple and vicious. One sweltering afternoon in late August, when she knew I'd be taking my nap, Chloe let herself into my backyard. I know this because Arthur, anticipating such a move, had arranged for the discreet installation of a small, motion-activated security camera, disguised as a birdhouse, overlooking the patio. The footage was sent directly to his secure server. I watched it later, in the quiet of his downtown office, a silent black and white film of destruction. Chloe, dressed in workout clothes, moved with a swift, brutal efficiency. She didn't rip plants out. That would be too obvious. Instead, she had a small bottle. With a syringe, she carefully injected a powerful herbicide directly into the base of my most prized rose bushes, the ones I was preparing for the annual Denver Rose Society competition. She targeted the peace roses my first husband gave me, the Mr. Lincoln I'd planted when Michael was born. It was a targeted assassination of my past. The next morning, I woke to a scene of inexplicable horror. The leaves on a dozen of my most beautiful bushes were already beginning to yellow and curl at the edges, a sickly, unnatural decay. By the following day, they were brown and withered. It looked like a blight, a sudden, aggressive disease. My heart seized. It felt like a part of my own body was dying. As if on cue, Michael and Chloe arrived that afternoon. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in a perfect pantomime of shock. "Oh my God, Eleanor! What happened?" I stood there, staring at the dead and dying roses, feeling a genuine, soul-deep grief that made my act all the more convincing. I don't know, I stammered, my voice trembling. "They were fine yesterday." "Mom, did you fertilize them recently?" Michael asked, his face etched with concern as he examined a shriveled leaf. Before I could answer, Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with gentle accusation. "Eleanor, darling, do you remember what you used? Last week, when I was here, I saw you mixing something in the watering can. It was in a bottle under the sink. The one with the skull and crossbones on it. There was a bottle of weed killer under the sink, which I used for the cracks in the driveway. I hadn't touched it in months." "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's for the pavement. I would never." "It's okay," Chloe said, wrapping an arm around me. "It's an easy mistake to make. The bottles look so similar." She looked at Michael over my head, her eyes wide and full of meaning. "See? It's worse than we thought. She's a danger to herself. She's poisoning her own garden." Michael's face fell. I could see the battle in his eyes. The evidence, circumstantial but damning, was right in front of him. The dead roses. The poison under the sink. A confused, distraught mother. He looked at the wreckage of my garden, the one thing he knew I cherished above all else, and saw proof of my decline. "Mom," he said, his voice heavy with a decision he didn't want to make. I think we need to have a serious talk about getting you some help. About a safer living situation. This can't go on." That was it. The checkmate she had been playing for. She had turned my sanctuary into a crime scene and cast me as the perpetrator. The look of triumph in her eyes was fleeting, but I saw it. She thought she had won. But her mistake was in believing the trap was hers. Later that evening, after they had left with promises to start making calls to assisted living facilities in the morning, I sat in my quiet kitchen. There was no despair. The grief for my roses was real, a sharp, aching pain. But beneath it was a cold, clear resolve. She had drawn the battle lines, and now it was time for my counterattack. I called Arthur. "She did it," I said, my voice flat. "We have the footage?" "Crystal clear," he confirmed. "The private investigator I hired has also finished his preliminary background report on her. It seems our Chloe has a history." "Tell me." "Her name isn't Chloe. It's Helen Stryker. She has 2 prior marriages, both to wealthy, recently widowed men significantly older than her. Both men died of sudden, unexpected heart attacks within 2 years of the marriage. Both men had signed over their assets to her shortly before their deaths. The families suspected foul play, but there was never enough evidence to press charges. After the second husband's death, she vanished from Scottsdale, Arizona, only to reappear in Denver a year later as Chloe Martin, a yoga instructor with a tragic, and entirely fictional, backstory about being orphaned as a child. The words landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just about greed. This woman was a black widow. My son wasn't just a mark, he was her next victim. The game had changed. This was no longer about protecting my home or my money. It was about saving my son's life. She's not just trying to get me out of the way, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She's isolating him. Once I'm gone, he'll be completely alone with her. Precisely, Arthur said, his voice grim. We need to end this, Eleanor. And we need to do it in a way that opens Michael's eyes completely and permanently. We spent the next hour on the phone, refining the plan we had discussed. A simple confrontation wouldn't be enough. Her word against mine, with Michael as the judge, was a risk I couldn't take. I needed to create a situation where her true nature would erupt, a contained explosion that Michael would have to witness firsthand. She's overconfident now, I said, an idea solidifying in my mind. She thinks I'm defeated. She'll be expecting me to be docile and confused. Use it, Arthur urged. I'll call them tomorrow, I said, my voice hardening. I'll tell them they're right. I'll surrender. I'll invite them to dinner to discuss the details. A final meal in my home. A farewell dinner. A last supper. It would be the perfect stage for the final act. Michael's voice on the phone the next morning was a cocktail of relief and sorrow. When I told him I was ready to talk, that I agreed it was time to consider other arrangements, I could almost hear the tension leaving his shoulders. Oh, Mom, I'm so glad, he said, his words slightly rushed. It's for the best, you'll see. Chloe and I have already found some wonderful places online for you to look at. That's nice, dear, I said, letting a faint, weary tremor into my voice. Why don't you and Chloe come for dinner tomorrow night? We can talk everything over then. I'd like to cook one last meal in my own kitchen. The hook was baited with sentimentality, and he took it without a second thought. Of course, Mom. That sounds perfect. We'll be there at 7. Chloe, I knew, would be ecstatic. The old woman had finally broken. The last obstacle was removing herself. I spent the next day preparing, not just a meal, but a stage. I chose the menu carefully: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans almondine. It was the ultimate comfort food, the meal I had made for Michael 1,000 times after scraped knees, broken hearts, and small triumphs. It was a meal that screamed of home, of safety, of a mother's love. It was a Trojan horse made of nostalgia. Arthur and I had one more conversation. The private investigator's report sat on my kitchen table, a thick manila folder filled with the sordid details of Helen Stryker's past life. We had everything we needed. Remember, Eleanor, Arthur said, his voice a steadying presence over the phone. The goal is not to convince her. The goal is to make her expose herself to Michael. Let her greed do the work. The moment she believes there's more money on the table, her mask will slip. At 7 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find them standing on my porch. Michael was holding a bottle of wine, his expression gentle and apologetic. Chloe was beaming, a triumphant glow just beneath her skin. She carried a ridiculously large bouquet of lilies, their scent funereal and cloying. Eleanor, these are for you, she said, thrusting them at me. A new beginning. How lovely, I murmured, taking them to the kitchen to find a vase, purposefully turning my back on them so they could share a private, victorious glance. The dinner began calmly. I played my part to perfection. I was subdued, a little forgetful, asking Michael to get the salt when it was right in front of me. I let my hands tremble slightly as I served the chicken. I saw the looks exchanged between them, the pity from my son, the smug satisfaction from her. They were humoring the dotty old lady, letting her have her final, harmless moment of domesticity. We talked about the logistics. They spoke of downsizing my belongings, of memory boxes. Chloe had brochures for Willow Creek Meadows, her voice bright and cheerful as she described the water aerobics classes and the weekly movie nights. It sounds peaceful, I said, pushing a green bean around my plate. "It will be," Michael said softly. "No more worries, Mom." Then, when the plates were cleared and I had served the apple pie, I set the final piece of my trap. I let out a long, theatrical sigh. "You know," I began, looking into the middle distance. "It's all so overwhelming. Selling the house, packing everything up. And my finances, they're such a muddle." I paused, then looked at them, my eyes wide and guileless. "Actually, there's something else. I wasn't sure if I should mention it, but your family. I got a call the other day. From a lawyer." Chloe, who had been idly scrolling through her phone, looked up. Her focus sharpened instantly. "It seems my second cousin, Mildred, from Ohio, passed away," I continued, my voice a masterpiece of elderly confusion. "I hardly knew her. But she was a bit of an eccentric. Left everything to her cats, except for a little something for me." The lawyer said, "Oh, it was such a funny number. I think he said $100,000? I let the number hang in the air. It was a carefully chosen amount. Not large enough to be unbelievable, but significant enough to be a powerful lure." Michael blinked. "100,000? Mom, that's wonderful." But I wasn't watching Michael. I was watching Chloe. It was like watching a shark smell blood in the water. Her whole posture changed. She sat up straighter. The condescending sympathy vanished from her eyes, replaced by a hard, calculating gleam. Her smile was still in place, but it was no longer soft. It was sharp. $100,000, she breathed, as if tasting the words. "Oh, Eleanor. What a blessing. That will certainly make your transition so much more comfortable." "Well, that's the thing," I said, looking helpless. "I don't know the first thing about such a sum of money." The lawyer was talking about investments and taxes. It was all so confusing. I looked from Michael to Chloe. "I was hoping, perhaps you could help me manage it." This was the moment of truth. Michael, my dear, sweet son, said exactly what I knew he would. "Mom, we don't need to worry about that right now. We can put it in a simple savings account. The important thing is getting you settled." But Chloe had other ideas. Her mind was racing, the gears turning so fast I could almost hear them click. "Don't be silly, Michael," she said, her voice sharp, cutting him off. "A savings account? With these interest rates? That's practically throwing money away. No, Eleanor, we need to be smart about this. We can invest it. Real estate. The market is booming. Or maybe some aggressive growth stocks. I know a broker who can turn that 100 into 300 in a year, easy." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine, her voice a low, seductive purr. "You just sign the financial power of attorney, Eleanor. The one we talked about. Let me handle it. I'll make that money work for you. For us." "Chloe," Michael said, a note of discomfort in his voice. "Let's slow down. It's Mom's money." "Of course it is, darling," she said, not looking at him. "And I'm going to protect it. We can't let her just fritter it away or let some banker take a huge cut." Her condescension was gone, replaced by a rapacious energy that was chilling. She saw the money, and everything else, my well-being, my son's concerns, faded into the background. I knew I had her. It was time to close the trap. "You know, Chloe," I said, my voice suddenly clear and steady. The frail, confused tremor was gone. "You seem to know a lot about managing older people's money." She looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes at my change in tone. "I've learned a few things," she said, a little defensively. "I'm sure you have," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "For instance, I'm sure you learned a great deal from Mr. Henderson in Phoenix. The retired gentleman whose entire life savings disappeared while you were his caregiver 3 years ago." The silence in the room was a physical thing. It pressed in on us, heavy and absolute. Chloe's face went white. The charming mask didn't just slip, it shattered. What? Michael whispered, looking from me to her. Or perhaps you learned more from Mr. Albright in Scottsdale, I went on, my voice as cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Your second husband. The one who died of a massive coronary just 2 months after signing his entire estate over to you. A man with no prior history of heart disease. I reached down beside my chair and lifted the manila folder Arthur had given me. I placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. Or should I stop calling you Chloe? Would you prefer Helen? Helen Stryker? Chloe, Helen, stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The transformation was terrifying. The beautiful, charming woman was gone, replaced by a cornered animal, her face a contortion of fury and panic. What is this? Michael demanded, his voice shaking. Mom, what are you talking about? He still didn't see. He was still trying to find a benign explanation. And then Helen exploded. You senile old bitch, she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound. She was on her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. You've been playing me. Lying to me. On the contrary, Helen, I said calmly. I've been letting you tell me exactly who you are. And I've been listening. She turned on Michael, her rage now desperate and wild. Are you going to let her talk to me like this? This crazy old woman who poisons her own roses and can't even remember to pay her bills? But it was too late. Her own words, her own raw venom, had done what my accusations never could have. The veil was torn. For the first time, Michael was seeing the woman he married, not the illusion she had crafted. He stared at her, his face pale with dawning, sickening comprehension. The lies, the little inconsistencies, the gaslighting, it all snapped into focus. The beautiful woman he loved had vanished. In her place stood a furious, spitting stranger. And he finally saw it. The aftermath of Helen's outburst was a wasteland of silence. The cozy, nostalgic atmosphere of the dining room had evaporated, replaced by a toxic, ringing quiet. Helen stood trembling, her chest heaving, the ugly words still hanging in the air like smoke. Michael sat frozen, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. He was looking at the woman he had married as if seeing her for the very first time, and the devastation on his face was a wound in my own heart. Finally, he spoke, his voice a raw whisper. Helen, is any of that true? Her eyes darted between us, the cornered animal seeking an escape route. For a moment, I saw her consider one last, desperate lie. But she saw the look on Michael's face, the finality in it, and knew the game was over. Her fury curdled into a sneer. He was an old fool, she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. They all were. Old men with money they didn't deserve, just waiting for a smart woman to come along and put it to good use. And you, she whirled on Michael, her voice rising to a shrill crescendo, you were the biggest fool of them all. Falling for the loving wife act, so desperate for a perfect family you couldn't see what was right in front of you. You and your pathetic, senile mother. She snatched her purse from the floor and stormed towards the door. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, she hissed over her shoulder, a final, impotent threat. Then she was gone. The front door slammed shut, its echo rattling the porcelain on the shelves. The silence that descended was heavier than before. It was the silence of a battlefield after the fighting stops. Michael didn't move. He just stared at the empty space where his wife had been. The roast chicken and apple pie sat on the table, a mockery of the happy family dinner they were supposed to represent. Slowly, as if moving underwater, he reached for the manila folder. His hands shook as he opened it. He scanned the top page, the investigator's summary. He saw the names, the dates, the police reports filed by suspicious family members, the copies of marriage certificates and death certificates. He saw a pattern of predation so cold and methodical it took his breath away. He closed the folder, his face ashen. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, his eyes were completely clear. The fog of her influence had lifted, and what he saw was not a frail, confused old woman, but his mother. He also saw his own blindness, his own gullibility, and the shame was a physical weight that made him slump in his chair. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry." He didn't need to say more. In those 5 words, I heard everything: the apology for his doubt, the horror at his own deception, the grief for a marriage that had never been real. I got up, walked around the table, and placed a hand on his trembling shoulder. "There's nothing to be sorry for, Michael. You have a good heart." She counted on that. He shook his head, burying his face in his hands. "How could I have been so stupid? The things she said about you. I almost believed her. I almost put you in a home." "She was very good at what she did," I said softly. "But that's over now." We sat like that for a long time. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked away the minutes, a steady, rhythmic sound in the ruins of our evening. Eventually, he lifted his head. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "The lawyer, Cousin Mildred, that was all a lie, wasn't it?" he asked. I gave his shoulder a small squeeze. "It was a trap. I had to make her show you who she was. It was the only way." He nodded, understanding. And I knew it was time for the final truth. 40 years of secrets had almost cost me my son. The silence had to end. "Michael," I said, returning to my seat opposite him. "There's more. Something you need to know. About your father." He looked up, confused. "What about him?" "He died when I was 5. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "He didn't. That was a lie. I told you that to protect you. I told him everything. I told him about Richard, the brilliant, driven man who had gotten in over his head. I told him about the threats, the danger, the impossible choice he had to make. I told him how he had vanished to save us, how he had watched from afar, a guardian ghost in our lives, providing for us in secret. And then, I told him about Mr. Abernathy's call. He died last month, Michael. For real this time. And he left everything to me." I took a deep breath. "He left $59 million. Michael stared at me, his mind reeling from one shocking revelation to the next. Michael was different. The boyish idealism that had always been a part of his charm was gone, replaced by a more sober, more thoughtful maturity. The experience had wounded him, but it had also forged him. He no longer looked at me with the gentle condescension of a son caring for his aging mother. He looked at me as an equal, a confidant. He would come over for dinner not out of duty, but for my company, for my advice. He'd spread the blueprints for his latest architectural project across my dining room table, and we would talk for hours about design, about structure, about the integrity of a foundation, conversations that were about so much more than just buildings. The $59 million sat in a trust, an abstract number on a bank statement. For weeks, we didn't even discuss it. It was too vast, too connected to the trauma we had just endured. We needed to heal first. We needed to rebuild the foundation of our own relationship, which had been shaken to its core. One cool Saturday in November, as we sat on my porch wrapped in blankets and drinking hot cider, Michael finally brought it up. "What are we going to do, Mom?" he asked, looking out over my garden, where the withered rose bushes had been carefully pruned back, their bare canes a stark but hopeful silhouette against the gray sky. "About the money." I'd had a lot of time to think about this. I could have bought a mansion. I could have traveled the world. But my world was right here, in this small house, this patch of earth. Richard hadn't left me a fortune to be spent. He had left me a tool, a resource, a final chapter of his story to be written. "It was never my money," I said. "And it's not yours either. It's his. It's your father's legacy." I looked at him, at the architect who had always dreamed bigger than his budget would allow. He built an empire from nothing, twice. He loved creating things. I think he would want us to build something with it. A spark lit up in Michael's eyes, the first true flicker of his old passion I'd seen since the divorce. A foundation, he said, the word full of possibility. The Vance Foundation. For what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. For young architects, he said, his voice growing stronger, more certain. For the brilliant, struggling kids with revolutionary ideas who can't get funding. For sustainable design, for innovative public housing. We could fund projects that actually help people. Build things that last. It was the perfect tribute. Using the fortune Richard had built in the shadows to bring new, beautiful things into the light. It was a way to redeem the money, to wash it clean of its dark origins and give it a purpose. We didn't sell my house. I had fought for this ground, and I would not relinquish it. My home became our unofficial headquarters. Arthur Abernathy, officially retired but unofficially bored, came on as the chairman of the board, his sharp legal mind perfect for navigating the complexities of philanthropy. We spent our days working, not as mother and son, but as partners, building a new future from the wreckage of the past. Today is a sunny spring morning. I am in my garden, my hands plunged into the cool, dark earth. New growth is emerging from the pruned-back rose bushes that Helen tried to destroy. Green shoots, vibrant and tenacious, are pushing their way towards the sun. In a few months, they will bloom again. Some scars, I know, remain. But a garden teaches you that destruction is rarely the end. It is often just a harsh form of pruning, making way for new, stronger growth. Michael is coming over later. He's bringing the first round of grant applications for the foundation. He's smiling again, a real smile that reaches his gray eyes, his father's eyes. He is happy. He is whole. I pat the soil around a new tea rose I planted last week. The sun is warm on my back. The air smells of damp earth and fresh beginnings. The house is quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet now. It's not the silence of secrets and hidden battles. It's the silence of peace. The kind of peace you don't inherit, the kind you can't buy. The kind you have to fight for. Richard didn't just leave me money. He left me a weapon to protect the only thing that ever truly mattered. He left me one final, impossible war to fight. And I, in the quiet twilight of my life, had finally won it for him. Now, there is only the garden, and the sun, and the earned, welcome silence. The real kind. The kind I deserve.